Magandang araw sa inyong lahat, and thank you so much for supporting this research webinar geared towards improving the academic writing skills of our ISCC undergraduate student researchers. The first speaker already oriented you on the use of the APA format 7th edition, and I trust that you will adhere to the principles of the APA format in citing your references both in text and your reference list. On my session, on the other hand, I will be orienting you on the use of the Imrad format in presenting your paper for external scrutiny. Please note that ISCC envisions that your undergraduate research studies will also be presented in local, national, and global research conferences, or get published in refereed journals. So it is best that we adhere to the international framework in building your manuscript to increase our chances of disseminating your research works. So let me present to you my session objectives. By the end of the session, you will be able to learn how to use the Imrad format as a framework for writing your own research studies and your undergraduate manuscript. I will also help you be more familiarized with the different parts and subparts in the research manuscript and hopefully incorporate the Imrad format in your own undergraduate studies. Apart from that, I will also be giving you an orientation with the workflow process and scheduling for your research proposals. So these are my session objectives. Before we go any further, let us define what Imrad format really is. The Imrad format is a way of structuring a scientific article or a research manuscript, and it is often used in the healthcare and natural sciences. The Imrad format stands for Introduction, Method, Results, and Discussion. And these are the major parts of the Imrad format. This means that the format makes theses and manuscripts shorter and more concise. Apart from that, in the Imrad format, opinions or statements that are not based on tangible evidences are discouraged. And this means that we need to adhere to guidelines in citing and giving credit to the original authors. As discussed a while ago, in ISCC, we will be using the APA format 7th edition in crediting our basis for our statements. And lastly, the words or phrases that we use in the APA format should be succinct or as brief and as short as possible. We usually use the word KISS or keep it short and simple when we are using the APA format. Now let us look at the reasons why we need to adopt the Imrad format in our undergraduate and faculty research in ISCC. You have to remember that using the Imrad format makes it easier for researchers like you, especially student researchers, to write and complete your research manuscript by providing you with a familiar structure that you can follow. In the ISCC Research Office, we will be providing you with a list of the parts of the Imrad format so that you can facilitate the writing of your research manuscript. Apart from that, the Imrad format also eliminates the bulk and heft of your research studies by eliminating unnecessary traditional parts of the research. Therefore, it makes your research more concise and more brief and more short. Apart from that, the Imrad format also allows the readers to be more focused on the key and vital aspects or ideas of your research, and they can focus on the results of your research studies by not overwhelming them with parts. And lastly, the Imrad format also facilitates reading, and it also improves both skimming and scanning to locate specific information without reading the entire article. So that's the reason why we have to employ the Imrad format in our undergraduate and faculty research. As I said a while ago, we will be adopting the Imrad format in our ISCC research because we want uniformity. We have to have a uniform format and structure for all our scientific article and research proposals and research reports so that we will have a basis for comparison and we will have a basis for grading. So we have to have uniformity in ISCC. Aside from that, we also want to conform to national and international standards so that if we want to publish our research or if we want to present them in local, national, and global conferences, at least our papers are already conforming to the national standards in formatting our research manuscripts. We also want to encourage faculty and students to increase their engagement in research by eliminating the heft of the research. Okay, so we want to eliminate the unnecessary parts, and by doing that, there will be more researchers in our area, because the reason why people have aversion when it comes to writing research is that the research manuscript has too many parts, and by adopting the Imrad format, we will be removing or eliminating that heft in our research manuscripts. We also would like to increase our chances for the undergraduate and faculty researchers to be able to publish and present their papers in national and global conferences. The reason why we are conducting this research seminar is we want you to be more prepared and be more empowered to write your research manuscript in a level that is already presentable and publishable. We also would like to establish and maintain quality in ISCC when it comes to our research manuscripts and our research papers. We want to establish a collection of undergraduate and faculty completed research studies that are of high quality and that we maintain emphasis on the matter of good science. And lastly, we would also like to create an organizational culture where research is not frowned upon. Gusto natin na maging mas maraming researchers pa dito sa ISCC because we are already making the format simpler and more concise. So that's the reason why we have to incorporate the Imrad format in our ISCC research. For the interest of time, we will only be focusing on writing the research proposal using the Imrad format because we know that for most of you, you are on your path to creating your research proposal. So I will orient you on the different parts of the proposal using the Imrad format. So we start with the introduction and with what are subsumed or included in the introduction. Number 1 is the background of the study. Number 2 is the research problem, and number 3 will be the significance of the study. Those are the primary components of the introduction for your research proposals. Now let us zero in on the background of the study. What are the components or what are the things that you should be writing or including in writing your background of the study? Remember that the background of the study provides the justification or the reason why you are conducting or you need to conduct a research study. This means that this portion of the introduction should portray the problem situation that shape the reason why you have to conduct that research study. The justification or the background of the study should clearly identify and define the problematic situation that your study is attempting to address. Apart from that, the background of the study should depict the problem in terms of global, national, regional, and local events or situations that indicate that indeed a problem does exist and that it requires critical investigation or scientific inquiry. Now, a tip that I always tell my students is that they should always use the inverted triangle method or the deductive approach in presenting the things that they have already researched. Meaning, you have to start from global situations, national situations, regional to local situations. That's the reason why we should be doing the inverted triangle or the deductive approach. You have to generalize the problem and then present different results or explanations that may affect your situation or your problem using the inverted triangle. Now, the background of the study should also clearly present the problem. Therefore, there should be a clinching statement or the clinching portion of your study to justify the need for research that will address the problem. So that is the background of the study. In writing the background of your study, it should also contain the operational definition of terms. before the operational definition of terms has its own part. However, in the Imrad format, it is already subsumed or included in the introduction or the background of the study. Now, what should be written in the operational definition of terms? The operational definition of terms should present a glossary of terms that must be understood by the reader. And you have to include key terms that will be defined in your study. The terms are to be defined operationally, and this means that the terms would be based on how these are used in your research study. Alright? So you have to clarify the meaning of the terms based on how it is used in your own research study. That is the reason why we have an operational definition of terms. You have to list down the different key terms that you will be defining or using in your problem or in your study, and that you have to create an explanation on how these terms are defined based on their usage on your own papers. You have to remember that in the operational definition of terms, we also introduce the different variables and concepts that are included in your study. Remember that the meaning of a variable may change depending on the context. And that is the reason why we have the operational definition of terms, to give it meaning or definition in terms of its usage on your own paper or study. Another important aspect of the background of the study is the theoretical framework, which provides a theoretical foundation or theoretical grounding of your investigation. This portion of the introduction should provide the theoretical foundation or the theoretical grounding of your study. And by that, I mean you have to identify and describe the theories that are used as the basis for your problem under investigation. Remember that the reason why you are conducting a research study is that you are to test a theory. The reason why we are conducting research studies is that we want to prove or disprove an existing belief or a theory. And so, we should present the theoretical framework on your background of the study. Always remember that you have to identify the different variables in your study and depict how these variables will be used to or interrelated in the form of a paradigm. And you can use multiple theories in your theoretical framework as long as it is related on the concepts or variables in your study. To put it simply, when we speak of theoretical framework, you have to find a theory that is related to your study and can be tested using your study. A good example of this is the attitudes and beliefs of teenage mothers when it comes to breastfeeding. We have the theory of social learning wherein naniniwala yung proponent ng social learning that attitudes are based on what the people see in their environment. And so you can test that theory using your research results. So yun po ang ibig sabihin ng theoretical framework. You have to find an existing theory that can be tested using your research results. And you have to also look into the variables of these concepts and make sure that these variables and concepts are also found in your theory and also in your paper. So that's how you find a good theoretical foundation or framework for your study. Tignan nyo yung mga variables and concepts if they are studied or included in an existing theory or not. Another important aspect of the background of a study is the review of related literature. And the review of related literature is typically called the library approach. Bakit siya tinawag na library approach is that you basically do desktop researching at this point. What we mean is that you have to read related studies that look the same or that are studying the same subject or phenomenon as your paper. So magtingin kayo ng mga kapareho ng mga papers nyo and look at what these results are saying. Ano ba yung sinasabi ng mga papers na to? So that is the reason why you have to conduct the review of related literature. Kumbaga, pupulsuhan nyo what the other research results of these related studies are saying in your paper. And in presenting the review of your related literature, you have to expect that there will be many research studies that are related in your study. And that when you present it, typically medyo mahihirapan tayo dyan kasi sa dami ng mga research studies or mga concepts na kailangan nating i-present. Now, a good tip that you can use in presenting your review of related literature is that it should follow a logical construction based on the problem. What I'm trying to say is that remember that in your operational definition of terms, you gave a definition or explanation on how these concepts or variables are used in your paper. So when you are writing your review of related literature, you also have to follow that same sequence para po mas maayos and mas organized yung ating review of related literature. So what I'm trying to say is that you again have to follow the inverted triangle that I told you a while ago. You have to present your data based on global or international research studies, national research studies, or kung meron kayong mas mga targeted or local studies na nahanap, you can also integrate it in your paper. So always follow the inverted triangle approach para po mas organized yung ating presentation of our review of related literature. Always remember, kailangan yung maghanap ng mga related research studies so that you can have a feel or a view of what other research studies are saying when it comes to your paper. Maganda po ito na gawin yung mas robust or mas rich yung paghahanap nyo ng mga review of related literature so that you can use it for your literature scoping during your data analysis or interpretation of results. Always remember that you can also use the things that you wrote in your review of related literature when you are already analyzing or justifying your analysis in the discussion for part of your paper. Now, after presenting the justifications why you need to conduct the study, and after presenting the different results of your related literature, you also have to clinch the situation or present a general overview of why you need to conduct the problem. This means that you have to state the general problem or the gaps in the knowledge that you have discovered during your review of related literature and present the general reasons why you are conducting that study in one cohesive paragraph. This last paragraph of the proposal or the introduction should contain a compelling argument why the research is needed. I will show you an example of what I wrote in my own dissertation. So this was my clinching statement when I was writing my dissertation. The issues on nursing advocacy and or lack thereof is a growing national concern. So yada yada yada. I'm already presenting you with, or the readers, I'm already presenting the readers what the problem is, what the literature are saying, the gaps in our knowledge, and the reason why I want to conduct that study. So you have to present it in a manner that your last paragraph will encapsulate all the things that have been written in your introduction. So that is how we herald or we introduce the statements of the problem. So you have to write a clinching statement for your introduction of the study as the last paragraph. Now that you are done with the introduction, it is now time for you to define or state the problem, or typically you say your research objectives. Now, when we speak of research objectives, they refer to statements or purpose for which the investigation or research study is to be conducted. Like I said a while ago, it will give the general direction of your research study. These research objectives typically describe the aims or the goals which you are expected to be attaining as the end result of your research process. And they are stated right after a well-defined problem on which they are based from and which they logically follow. So what I'm trying to say is that the general objective will tell the readers what your research paper is trying to address, or what your research paper is trying to answer, what questions your paper is trying to answer. Now, in the statement of the problem, we have two subparts: the general objective and the specific objective. In the general objective, it is a broad statement of purpose for which uses well-defined measurable concepts. And for the specific objectives, it provides a detailed account of all the questions that are particular or specific to the topic under study. And in the specific objectives, typically, we present the variables and the concepts that are related to the research study and how they relate to each other or to the study in itself. And it is presented in the form of a question. I will give you an example of the research study or the research objectives of one of my undergraduate research advices paper. So this is the research of the research objectives. On the upper hand, that is the upper left part, that is the general objective. So sabi dito, the study aims to define the level of readiness, stress, and satisfaction to distance education of midwifery students of Ilocos Community College during the COVID-19 pandemic. So that is the general objective, and it tells you an overview, it gives an overview of what that research study is trying to accomplish. But when we look at the questions 1 to 5, those are already the specific objectives, the specific questions that that research study is trying to target. So, titignan natin. First question, which is the specific objective, is what is the profile of the respondents in terms of the following socio-demographic factors? Number 2, what is the level of readiness of ISCC students for distance education in terms of the following? So, ibig sabihin, you will also be presenting variables and concepts that are used in your study in your paper. So those are your general and specific objectives. Now, for example, your paper also has a correlation in its statistics. Gusto nyong makita how this variable affects the other. So maglalagay din kayo ngayon ng mga additional specific objectives or research questions. Example, is there a significant relationship between the respondents' readiness to distance learning and their stress level? Kung yun yung isang gustong malaman ng papel nyo, you can also write that as your specific objective. Again, what I'm trying to say is that before you conduct your research study, you have to have a general idea on what your paper is trying to attain, what questions your paper is trying to answer. That is the function of the research objectives. A typical question being asked by students who are doing qualitative research is that, Sir, paano naman po kami? Wala po kaming mga variables in our study. Ano pong ilalagay natin? So, my answer to that is, you don't have to put variables kung hindi nyo naman po kailangan yon or it is not included in your study. You just have to present the objectives on your paper in a well-defined manner. I'll give an example. So this study aims to uncover the lived experiences of midwives in delivering healthcare services in San Juan, La Union in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So specifically, yung research study niya na qualitative just want to look into the experiences of the midwives who are delivering healthcare services in San Juan, La Union. At simple as that, kung hindi naman po kailangan ng mga variables, yung inyong study or inyong methodology, you don't have to place any of the variables. As long as your research objectives clarifies or gives a direction of your paper, then you're good to go. Now, another important aspect in your research is the scope and delimitation. Okay? So, you have to define the coverage of your research study and its limitations or its boundaries. In research, when we say scope, it identifies the coverage of the study in terms of answering questions like what, where, when, who, and how the research is done. Meaning, the scope of the study states up to what extent your study covers, kung saan lang yung sakop ng inyong study. A good example of that is when you are looking at the mental health status of ISCC students. Kunwari, during the pandemic, kung may nagtanong sa inyo, paano kung pre-pandemic, did your paper answer it? Using your scope of your study, sasabihin nyo, hindi po, because we only conducted the study from this to this, and yung scope lang po na yun yung sinakop ng aming study. Beyond that, hindi na po kayang i-answer ng aming research study. So that is the function of the scope of the study. On that note, we also have to define the boundaries of our research by writing it as a form of delimitation. When we say delimitation, we will have to identify the different constraints that limited the coverage of the study to what it is. The constraints may come in the form of time, resources, materials, equipment, references, manpower, finances, or expertise. So dito po sa ating delimitations, you will identify the boundaries ng mga hindi nyo na po i-cover. So you will have to define the limits of your paper so that when you are asked if you cover this thing, at least you have something to justify why you chose not to cover it because it's already part of your delimitation. So what I'm trying to say is ikakahon natin yung ating research study. We will define its coverage or extent, and we will also define its boundaries so that we have a targeted approach when it comes to answering other people's questions about the results of our paper. So at least kung meron tayong mga set na pag-aaralan lang or i-investigate, we will have a general direction of what our research will look like. Now, the next aspect of your research proposal or your research study is the significance of the study. This portion of your research proposal or research manuscript identifies the beneficiaries or the stakeholders who will be benefited from the findings of your study. And in here, you are also expected to provide a description that corresponds to the benefits that these stakeholders will get from your research study. Now, always remember that in this phase of the research, it explains why the researcher selected the research problem or the research topic over other probable ones. And aside from that, you also will not only have to explain why you chose the problem, but you also have to convince the approving committee or your panel about the need to conduct the study and how this study that you are proposing will be beneficial to the different individuals and how it can be of great help to the discipline or to the society. Now remember that your research study should have a contribution in the discipline where you are in, the industry where you are working for, the community, policy and decision makers, the academe, and future researchers. Now I will show you a sample of the significance of the study. So according to this study, the study adds to the wealth of nursing knowledge by providing statistical evidence on the extent of participation of nurses to advocacy activities. So as you can see, this study will add to the wealth of knowledge within the nursing discipline. Aside from that, the statement also says, by bringing content cohesion to the different voices and opinions on this topic and unearthing or discovering its current barriers and facilitators, this study should also provide guidance to nursing leaders, hospital administrators, professional group organizations, towards workflow redesign and improvement of processes. So as you can see, this study will also guide the policy makers and decision makers and even academicians in their decisions. The study will also be equally important to nurse educators to guide curriculum recalibration and for future nurse researchers. So as you can see, the author of this paper is justifying the need for conducting a research study, and he is also exemplifying or showing us the different functions of your research results. Ano yung magiging kwenta ng research nyo after it is completed? That is the main meat of the significance of your study. So you have to be very clear about it, how it can help the discipline, the different industries, the community, policymakers, decision makers, the end users, the academicians or teachers, future researchers, and other people that may benefit from your paper. Now, another important aspect in your research manuscript is what we call the framework or the assumption. Now, when we speak of the conceptual framework, this is the graphic presentation of how the variables that you have written in the statement of the problem interact with one another. So meaning ito yung mga box na nakikita na po natin sa ating mga completed research study na may mga line doon na independent, dependent variable. This is what we call the conceptual framework. Now, for senior high school programs, we have the independent variable, dependent variable format. But for college and faculty or graduate studies, we use the input, process, output format. So basically, what you wrote in your statement of the problem, the variables there, should be graphically presented in the conceptual framework to really note how these interact with one another. Yun po yung reason kung bakit tayo may conceptual framework. By merely glancing at it, we already know or we already have an idea of how the variables interact with one another using the lines and arrows that we use. Now, we also have what we call the assumptions in your paper. The assumptions state or serve as the basis for critical interrogation. Ang mga assumptions po kasi, these are the things that are accepted as true or at least plausible by researchers and peers who will read your paper, your thesis, or your manuscripts. One of the most common na assumption natin when we are doing quantitative research is that people will be answering your questionnaire truthfully and honestly. So, kailangan yung isulat yung mga assumption nyo. Ina-assume namin na we were able to gather truthful data because we are assuming that our respondents have answered this question truthfully. That can be one of your assumptions. Aside from that, if you are studying the behavior of an individual pero gumamit kayo ng questionnaire, you can also assume that behavior can be gauged using your survey forms. So yun po yung mga assumptions na nilalatag natin. We lay all our tables on the card so that when people ask us, bakit naman ito yung ginamit nyo? How sure are we? At least we can tell them that these are based on our assumptions. Alright? So lastly will be your hypothesis. And when we talk about your hypothesis, it is the educated guess. Okay? And the research hypothesis is usually born from your statement of the problem. Now, paano po natin siya gagawin? We have actually two types of hypothesis. Number one is the null hypothesis and the other one is the alternate hypothesis. Let's take question 5, for example, for your statement of the problem. Ang question natin dito or the research objective is that your paper will answer the question, is there a significant relationship between the respondents' readiness to distance learning and their stress level? Meron po bang interrelatedness or connection or relationship yung readiness ng isang bata na mag-aral using distance learning sa kanyang stress level? Gusto natin yung makita as our research question. Now, our research will answer that question. But before we go and gather data, we should have a hypothesis. Ano sa tingin natin ang answer sa question na ito? Always remember that it is a traditional practice to always use the null hypothesis when you are writing your hypothesis. Pag sinabi nating null, zero, wala. Okay? So anong isusulat natin when we are writing the hypothesis? Yung null hypothesis nyo should be stated that there is no significant relationship between the respondents' readiness to distance learning and their stress level. Ito yung ina-assume natin na hypothesis. Sinasabi ninyo in your hypothesis na sa tingin po namin, walang relationship yung respondents' readiness sa distance learning sa stress level. Ganun po natin siya isusulat. And then, we will be conducting a research. Now, after the completion of research, magsusulat din tayo dito ng alternate hypothesis. Yung alternate hypothesis naman ay kabaliktaran ng null hypothesis. So, ang sasabihin naman natin dito, in the alternate hypothesis, there is a significant relationship between the respondents' readiness to distance learning and their stress level. Now, sir, anya nga rin isurat min, paano namin ito ina-approach? Diba, ang gagamitin natin is the null hypothesis. Walang relationship kung kana tayo. Now, when we conducted a study and then kinumpute natin yung statistics ng mga nag-gather natin na data and it is already showing na baka may relationship nga talaga yung readiness and your stress level. So, what do? e-eliminate ngayon natin yung ating null hypothesis, and what we are going to use is we will accept the alternate hypothesis, which is nagsasabi na there is a significant relationship between the respondent's readiness to distance learning and their stress level. So ganun po yon. When we are writing our hypothesis, we write our hypothesis in its null form. There is no relationship, there is no significant ganon po. But, pag yung statistics po natin after completing the paper, pinatunayan na meron nga, we will reject the null hypothesis and we will accept the alternate hypothesis na nagsasabing there is a significant relationship. So, that is how we write your hypothesis in your research proposal. Null pa lang po yung gagamitin natin after the completion of your study. That is the only time wherein you will either reject the null hypothesis or accept the null hypothesis. Ganun po yun sa ating hypothesis. After you're done writing your research introduction and once you are done with clarifying and identifying and defining your research problem, the next step that you should do in the Imrad format is writing your methodology. Now, in research, we only have 3 methodologies, major branches. We have the quantitative methodology, the qualitative research methodology, and the mixed method. When we speak of quantitative research methods, that means that you are using numbers, statistics, to answer a specific research question. But when we say qualitative research studies, we will be using words, experiences, thoughts, and opinions of other people to answer a research question. But when we speak of mixed methods, marami ding klase yan, but basically, it is a combination between the quantitative research using numbers and statistics and the qualitative research using words, opinions, experiences of other people. Pinagmi-mix mo lang siya, kaya siya tinawag na mixed methods design. So, these are the 3 major methodologies that we use in research. When you are writing your research methodology, you have to be very specific. Anong gagamitin mong methods? Is it quantitative, qualitative, or mixed? Now, once you are done deciding if you will be using this method, or this method, you also have to specify what research design will be used for that particular methodology. Magkaiba po yung research design at magkaiba din po sa methodology. Now, like I said, pag sinabi nating methodology, 3 klase lang. Quantitative, qualitative, and mixed method. But for research design, you also have to remember na sa quantitative, marami pong mga research designs dyan. There are descriptive, there are correlational, there are comparative, there are evaluative research studies, and so on and so forth. In the qualitative research, marami din pong mga research designs dyan. May phenomenology, may ethnography, may mixed method, may photo voice, and so on and so forth. In the mixed method po, meron din po tayong mga iba't ibang uri ng mixed methods. We have the sequential explanatory mixed method. We also have the sequential exploratory mixed method. Meron din tayong tinatawag na concurrent parallel mixed method, mga embedded methods, and so on and so forth. Now, when you write your methodology, you have to be very clear of the methodology along with the research design that you are using. Aside from that, aside from identifying the method and the design, you also have to give a justification why you think that that design is appropriate for answering your research problem. Example, you want to look into the sense of resilience of Filipino people during the pandemic. So, pwede pa tayong gumamit ng qualitative dyan? Yes. If you want to interview people, we can do phenomenological designs. So, i-explain mo lang kung bakit interview yung gusto mong gawin to answer that specific question. Sir, paano naman po kung quantitative yung gusto namin gamitin? Pwede po ba yun? Yes. You only have to justify why or what design you are going to use and why you are going to use it. Meron naman po tayong mga questionnaires on resilience na pwede nating gamitin in our quantitative design. So again, it's just a matter of justifying why that chosen research method and research design is employable for your paper. Sir, paano po namin ito gagawin? Hindi naman po kami ganun familiar sa research. That's the reason why I am encouraging you to read research outputs from people that have already completed research studies so that your paper will be guided accordingly. Kung nakapili na po kayo ng inyong research methodology and you have already established kung anong research design under that methodology yung gusto nyong gamitin, the next thing that you should do is you have to define your locale, your population, and your sample. Now, when we speak of locale, it means where you are going to conduct your study. It may refer to the setting, to the venue, or to the place where you are going to execute your research investigation. When we talk of the population, this refers to the characteristics of the people who are going to be involved in your study. Are you going to study students? Are you going to study male population in ISCC? Those are your population, characteristics po. Gusto nyo bang pag-aralan lang yung mga 18 to 20 years old or 0 to 60 years old or mga newborns lang or mga kalesa drivers lang or mga kotsero lang na nanggagaling na residents of vegan? Those are your population. Now, kung na-establish na po natin yung mga population natin, kung kanino natin i-execute or i-conduct yung research investigation natin, the next thing that we're going to do is determine the sample. When we speak of the sample, it is actually the number of people who will be included in your study. So, di ba nga ito yung population? Kunwari, the study will be conducted at Ilocos Sur Community College and the study will only involve ISCC students enrolled during the pandemic. No kunada kuma, that is our population. Ngayon, there are instances wherein the number of your population is too big to be involved in your research study. So, kailangan mo lang kumuha ng portion na yon, a slice of the pie, and that will serve as your sample. So, pag sinabi natin pong sample, these are the number of the people who will be included in the study and that the results from this sample will be enough to represent the whole population. So, yun po yung sample natin. So, you have to determine sino yung magiging participants mo, saan gagawin yung research study mo, at ilan yung kukunin mo sa mga population mo. Apart from that, you also have to discuss the sampling technique that you used. When you say sampling technique, how did you determine the number of the people to be involved in the study? Paano mo alam kung ilan yung kukunin? Did you use the Sloven's formula? Gumamit ka ba ng OpenEpi application to determine the number of the sample that you can use? Or kinuha mo ba silang lahat? Did you use the other methods for sampling your paper? You have to be very clear. Hindi po pwede na, ito na lang yung kukunin kong sample kasi ang dami masyado, graduating ako. That should not be in research. You have to follow a specific framework or guideline in sampling your population. So yun lang naman po yung dapat natin gawin. We have to be very scientific when it comes to determining the size of the sample that we will be getting. So you have to specify your sampling technique. Aside from that, you also have to present your selection technique. Kunwari, 100 individuals yung sinabi mo na kukunin mo as samples. Paano mo pipiliin yung mga 100 individuals na to from the thousands of people in your population? Shall you do random sampling? Yung random sampling is bubunutin mo yung number ng taong yon and then yun yung pipiliin mo. That's a random sampling. Or will you do convenience sampling? Nunyati available ken kan, iso ti kinapatang mon kayak dalakit di. You will continue with your research. Ano pa? Is it snowball sampling? Manang, after deto yung survey kit iturong nakmampay no sino pa iti amamom nga mabalin mang sungbat deto yung question. That's what we call snowballing sampling technique. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is you have to present kung ano yung selection technique and sampling technique na gagamitin mo in your own research study. Again, during the proposal, these things are usually asked by the research panel. So you have to clarify these things before you subject yourself for proposal defense. Now, after clarifying the locale, the setting, the population, and the sample size of your study, and how these samples will be selected, the next thing that you have to clarify is the data gathering tool that you will be using for your research study. Again, the type of data gathering tool that you will be describing should be appropriate to the research design and the research methodology that you will be using. Kunwari, you will be using a quantitative methodology. Okay? And then descriptive research design, kunwari yung gagamitin nyo. Anong tool ang gagamitin nyo? That can be in a form of a questionnaire or in a form of a survey. So when you are writing your data gathering tool for your quantitative study, the first thing that you have to do is you have to identify the instrument that will be used for data gathering. Is it a 4-point Likert scale? Okay? 3-point Likert scale? Ganun po. You have to define kung ano po yung tool na yon. Aside from that, you also have to describe the parts of that instrument. Part 1 will take information regarding, part 2 will capture ganong data, so you have to specify po yung mga different parts by describing it in your paper. Aside from that, you also have to describe how the instrument was conducted. Was it self-made? Kayo po ba yung gumawa nun? Kung kayo yung gumawa nun, was it content validated by experts? Was it subjected to reliable testing? You have to describe. Sir, paano naman kung ayaw namin gumawa ng sarili naming questionnaire kasi mahirap? You can also adopt questionnaire. Kung nag-adopt kayo ng questionnaire, that's adopt na letter A, meaning tumingin kayo ng mga questionnaire pero may iba kayong pinalitan, that is adapted questionnaire. I-describe nyo din kung saan siya galing, ano yung mga pinalitan nyo, and if it was subjected to content validity and content reliability tests. We also have another technique called adopting. That's with the letter O, adopt. Meaning, kung ano yung nakita nyong questionnaire online or sa isang completed na paper, you just get it en toto. Nung niya tinakita yon, isuti-inusar yon. That's what we call adopting a questionnaire. Now, you describe kung saan siya galing. Okay? Bakit yun yung napili nyo na questionnaire and is it enough to answer your research question? You have to be very specific about your data gathering tool so that the experts who will serve as your research panel will know kung kailangan ba niyang mag-content validity test or reliability test or kung enough na ba yon to gather the information needed to answer your specific research questions. So that is for the quantitative study making use of questionnaires and surveys. Now in the cases wherein the student will be using the qualitative research methodology, you have to be very clear on how you will conduct the data gathering process by explaining your data gathering tool. Usually in the qualitative research designs, we use interview structure or interviews, or we use guides. Now, in the qualitative research design, we don't use questionnaires. Ang ginagamit natin as the data gathering tool is yourself. You, as the researcher, is the main data gathering instrument or the data gathering tool because you will be conducting all the interviews. Now, in writing your research proposal for qualitative studies in the context of data gathering tools, you have to identify the data gathering instrument and interview structure that you will be using. So, paano mo isusulat yon? Will the interview be open-ended, meaning it's not answerable by a yes or a no? Will it be structured, wherein all the questions are already laid down there in your interview guide, mag-answer na lang sila ng yes or no or other things? And then is it semi-structured, or is it a collection of an open-ended questions na nakalista. You have to identify the type of the interview that you will also be conducting. Is it the KII or the Key Informant interview wherein nandun ka as a interviewer, nandun din yung inyong ini-interview, one-on-one lang ba ito na in-depth? Will it be focused group discussion wherein nandun ka as the facilitator and there are many other interviewers there having conversation with you? Will it be via phone interview? Will it be using yung questionnaire lang na mag-e-essay na sila? You have to determine your data gathering tool by explaining it in your proposal. Aside from that, you also have to justify kung bakit ito yung napili ninyo na data gathering strategy or approach. Okay? So those are the things that you should be writing for your qualitative research studies. Now that we are done clarifying and identifying our data gathering tool or the data gathering instrument, the next thing that we are going to do is we will have to describe the data gathering process. Paano tayo mag-gather ng data? What are the steps that we are going to do? Now, usually, for your research studies, undergraduate research studies, we will seek permission from the people, especially the locale wherein your paper will be conducted. So, ilatag mo lahat ng mga steps na gagawin mo. Specifically, for quantitative research, bilang gumagamit po tayo mga questionnaire and surveys, you have to identify the different strategies and plans on how you will float your questionnaire or distribute your questionnaire to your respondents. And then you will also have to identify the different retrieval options or strategies that you will be doing. Meron ba kayong mga research legs doon na magko-collect mismo ng mga papers or mga questionnaires? Or kayo ba mismo yung pupunta doon to collect the questionnaire? Mga ganong tipo. You also have to present the different strategies that you will use for storing your data or information that you collected from the questionnaire or survey forms. Paano nyo siya i-store or i-imbak? Will you be using a data matrix, using your Excel files, or magmamanual ba kayo na magko-collate ng mga data? Those are the things that you have to include in your data gathering procedure if you are using the quantitative research design. Wherein, in your qualitative research study, pareho lang din po yung gagawin ninyo. You have to present the different plans on when, where, and how you will be conducting your interview. And you will also have to identify the different strategies and techniques that will help you document your interview process. Kunwari, will you be using video recorded interviews? I-audio record nyo ba yon? Or will you be hiring someone who will do the transcription while you do the interview? Isulat nyo po kung ano yung procedures na gagawin ninyo during the interview process. Aside from that, you will also have to give strategies or plans on how you will store this information. Magta-transcribe ba kayo agad-agad? May babayaran ba kayo to transcribe yung mga interviews nyo from audio recording into a written format? Will you be using a software to help you transcribe or give caption to the interviews? Mga ganung tipo po ang isusulat natin for our data gathering procedure. Aside from that, you also have to write what are the type of data or information or documents that you will be using for your interviews. Will you be using field notes? Magkakaroon ba kayo ng mga analytical files? Magda-diary ba kayo or magme-memo ba kayo? Those are the things that you should also include in your data gathering procedures. Kailangan po yan so that your validators or your external panel will know how you came up with your paper. Kasi kasama na po ito sa ating data analysis, yung mga nilalagay natin in the data gathering procedures, especially for qualitative research studies. Once we are done clarifying our data gathering procedures, the next thing that we are going to plan is the data management and analysis. The big question that we have to ask ourselves when we are writing our research proposal is, paano natin i-analyze yung mga magagather natin na information or data from our research subjects? That is the big question that you have to answer during this aspect of your research manuscript. Now, for your quantitative study, like I said a while ago, it makes use of numbers. It makes use of statistics. The best thing that you can do is you have to consult your research advisor or other people who are experts when it comes to statistical computation so that they can advise you on the best statistical tool that you can use to answer your research question. So what I'm trying to say is that you have to identify the appropriate method of quantification and measurement that is relative for your own research problem. Always remember na sa quantitative research, marami po tayong mga questions dyan na sasagutan. And sometimes, not all of these questions can be answered by one statistical computation alone. And that you will have to employ several different statistical tools so that all of your questions can be answered. Now, in writing your data management and analysis for your quantitative study, you have to describe how the quantified data will be statistically treated relative to your research question. Anong gagamitin mong statistical tool? Will you be using means, frequencies, percentages? Gagamit ba kayo ng mga Pearson R correlational, t-test, ANOVA, chi-square test? I know that this may be overwhelming for you, but with the right guidance and with proper supervision from your research advisor and your research statistician, you will be able to select appropriate research statistical tools to analyze your paper. What I'm trying to say is that you don't have to be shy. You don't have to feel embarrassed if you're asking your teachers and other people for advice specifically regarding statistical treatment of your paper. Okay lang po ang magtanong because it is part of your learning process. So, make it a habit. Kung hindi po kayo sure sa statistics na gagamitin nyo, you go ask for advice. Okay? The research office is open so that for you so that we can answer your queries. The same process is true for qualitative research studies. You will also have to discuss and describe the analysis method or the analysis tool that you will be using. Ang kaibahan lang in the quantitative study, we use statistical tools. However, for qualitative studies, we use different approaches to analyzing experiences, opinions, and words by other people. Anong gagawin lang natin dito is that we have to describe kung ano yung process na gagamitin natin. For example, you are doing a phenomenological design, okay? Looking at experiences of other people. And how will you analyze it? Kunwari, pwede kayong gumamit ng Kolaichis method. If you decided that you will be using Kolaichis method, what are the different steps in that method of analysis? So you have to be very clear sa mga steps or procedures that are part of that analysis tool that you are going to adopt. Example, gagamit kayo ng George's method of thematic analysis. You again have to identify the different steps and intricacies of that qualitative data analysis method. So you have to be very specific. I-describe nyo po kung bakit yun yung napili yung thematic analysis tool and ano yung mga steps na kailangan nyong gawin so that you will be able to analyze the data or the information properly based on the framework that you are using. So that is what you should do when you are describing the data management analysis portion if you are writing a qualitative research manuscript. Another aspect of your manuscript that is important to be included in your research proposal is the underpinnings. When we speak of underpinnings, we have theoretical underpinnings and philosophical underpinnings. For your theoretical underpinnings, they are usually done or used in quantitative studies. For quantitative research designs po kasi, like I said a while ago, it is aimed to test an existing theory. And as researchers, you should present that existing theory that is proposed to be tested by your paper. So in your theoretical framework, sinabi ko po kanina that you have to write there the theories that look the same with your paper, and that the variables that are included there are also seen in your paper. Okay lang po na yun yung mga theories na sinulat nyo sa theoretical framework will also be written in your theoretical underpinning. Now, you are now stating in your theoretical underpinning that your paper will be testing these theories. So, yun po yung isusulat natin for quantitative study for the theoretical underpinnings, the theories that can be tested by your research paper. The same is true for your qualitative research studies. The only difference is that we will be using philosophical underpinnings to ground our analysis of the data. What I am trying to say is that you have to remember that for qualitative research, you are the person who will be analyzing the study. It's not your computer, it's not your calculator, but it's you. And you also have to remember that you are a mosaic, a combination of your experiences, of the things that you have experienced in the past, and that can also affect how you view a specific opinion by other people. So what I am trying to say is that as qualitative researchers, you also have to identify kung anong lens ang gagamitin nyo, kung anong perspective ang gagamitin nyo, kung anong philosophical stance ang gagamitin nyo. Will you be using the feministic perspective, or will your analysis only be shallow? Will you be interpreting your paper? You have to determine kung anong lens or perspective ang gagamitin nyo so that the readers will have an idea, kaya niya pala nasabi ito sa kanyang mga analysis is because he or she used this philosophical underpinning. Ito palang ganitong perspective yung ginamit niya. So you have to write that down in your philosophical underpinnings if you are using the qualitative research design. If you have already identified the different procedures, the different tools, and the different data analysis methods that you will be using for your research studies, the next thing that you are going to do is you have to write the ethical considerations that you will be following while you are conducting the research study. Always remember that we are following specific standards in the conduct of our research study, and that we are trying to make sure that no people will be harmed in the conduct of your study. So you have to adhere to these ethical considerations. Now, for both quantitative study and qualitative study, halos pareho lang po yung mga ethical considerations na fina-follow natin. You also have to observe this process or these ethical considerations for the whole duration of your research process. And you will also have to discuss and describe the different strategies that you will be employing so that you will be able to employ or follow these ethical considerations. Ano yung gagawin ninyo? You'd have to describe how will you be protecting the privacy and the confidentiality of the research information. Paano natin malalaman or mapipigilan yung paglabas ng mga data from the interview from other people, or paano natin masisigurado na people who are not involved in your research will not get the data, will not have a possession of the data that you have collected. You have to write those strategies. That is very important as part of your ethical consideration in protecting the privacy and confidentiality of the research information. Aside from that, how will you be protecting your participants? The vulnerability of research participants. Always remember that there may be harm that is included in your study. For example, gagawa ka ng mga clinical trials or gagawa ka ng mga experimental research studies. How can we be sure that what you are doing to your patients or your respondents, I should say, are not harmful to them? Kunwari, you are doing an interview. You're doing an interview that may be traumatic to that person. How will you be able to protect your vulnerable participants? You also have to write that down. Aside from that, how will you be storing your data? What are the risks that are associated during the participation in your research study? Will you be using informed consent? How will you be employing this, or how will you be using your informed consent, babasahin mo ba yon or ipapabasa lang sa kanya, i-email, you have to write those down. How will you recruit your participants? Bibigyan mo ba sila ng pera? Will you be giving them pang merienda, bother fee, or will you be just talking to them? Isu-sweet talk mo lang sila. What are the things that you should be following while you are recruiting your participants? Yun po yung mga kailangan natin na isulat din. Aside from that, what are you going to do? Kung kunwari sinabi ng isang participant, Sir, ayoko na pong sumali sa research ninyo kasi hindi ko lang gusto. What are you going to do? Will you be destroying the information that you have collected from them? Or will you still be including them on your paper? Or hindi mo ba sila papayagan? You have to write those down. So, dapat yung mga strategies na gagamitin nyo po when you are conducting your research should be written there as part of your ethical consideration. So, always remember the ethical consideration part is written there so that your research panel will know that you are not putting in danger your research subject. So, dapat you have to convince them that you will not be doing them harm. Always remember po yung ating concept of beneficence, which is doing good, and non-maleficence, which is not doing any harm. So yun po yung mga usually na sinusulat natin in the ethical consideration. But if you choose to do qualitative research, you also have to add other inclusions for qualitative designs. Kailangan nyo din pong magsulat ng establishing trustworthiness, which is one aspect of your qualitative research study, along with the researcher's background or what we call bracketing. Sa atin namang establishing trustworthiness, how will we be able to trust your paper? Kasi nga ikaw lang yung nag-analyze dyan. There are no numbers to support what you are claiming to be true. Okay? So you have to establish trustworthiness by identifying the different strategies that you will do to establish the rigor of your paper or the truthfulness of your paper by establishing credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability. Aside from that, it is also important that you write your researcher's background. Iba-bracket mo yung sarili mo. Anong ibig sabihin when we say bracketing one's self? You have to discuss the feelings, the ideas, opinions, emotions, past experiences mo as the researcher towards the subject that you are studying, so that you will have a basis wherein when you are analyzing the paper, sasabihin mo na parang hindi na po yung mga participants ang nagsasalita sa paper, parang ako natuwa. Alright? So that is the reason why you have to bracket yourself. Remember, as qualitative researchers, your only role is to serve as the voice of your participants. It should not be you who is speaking in that paper. Hindi dapat analysis mo lang, yung opinion mo lang yung nandun, kundi dapat opinion ng mga research participants mo. So the beauty of doing bracketing is that alam mo na agad-agad, bakit parang ako na yung nagsasalata dito, so that you can anchor yourself back when you noticed that you are already having your bias in your paper. So those are the other inclusions for your qualitative research designs. And lastly, you should also include all of your references. Sir Bert a while ago discussed about the APA Format 7th edition when it comes to referencing your resources. So you have to present all credible resources that you used, the materials and references, yung mga resources, using the APA format guidelines. Aside from that, you should also include in your research proposal the different appendices. Like for example, yung sample communication letter nyo or approval from the study site. That means that pag pinakita nyo to sa mga research panel nyo, they will know that you have already gained access or permission to conduct that study on that particular site. Aside from that, you also have to present the informed consent form that you will be using. And typically, we already have downloadable forms from the World Health Organization. And you can just download that and use it for your research paper. If you are doing your qualitative study, dapat you also have to place there your interview guide. kung gagamit man kayo ng interview guide. And also, you need to place your sample questionnaire if you are doing a quantitative research so that immediately your research panel will have an idea on what tool you are going to use, and they will help you determine if your tool is already enough to answer your research questions. And lastly, you should provide a list of the study sites kung saan nyo ika-conduct yung inyong mga research investigation. You also write there the population of the people to be included in your study and the sample or the number of people projected or calculated na kukunin nyo sa inyong mga research investigation. So, those are the parts of your research proposal. Now, as I discussed a while ago, I will also be describing the workflow process on how you will schedule for your research proposal. So, for example, you have already done writing your research manuscripts. Meron na kayong mga proposals. The next thing that you're going to do is you will write a letter of intent to the research office signifying that you want to have your research proposals. We already have templates for these letters. You can just ask your research department focal persons. So pag nakapagsulat na po kayo ng inyong intent letter for your research proposal, your research instructor will check your research manuscript and they will check the different parts of your research manuscript using a checklist, and that will be used to signify that indeed your research manuscript already contains all the things that are needed for a research proposal. So pag nakumpleto nyo na po yung mga different parts ng inyong research manuscript, the next thing that your instructors are going to do is that they will coordinate with your department research focal persons. And these research focal persons will be the ones who will build your research panel. Sila na po yung mga pipili ng magiging panel ninyo during your research proposal. And after that, pag na-build na po natin yung inyong research panel members, kung saan may chairman, may critic, may 2 panel members, may statistician, kung okay na po tayo doon, the next thing that we're going to do is the research department focal person and the research instructor shall find a schedule for the proposal defense based on the availability of your panel member. So maghahanap na po ngayon sila ng date wherein the research proposal will be done. And after that, the department research focal person and the instructor shall also give evaluation form as the front page of your research manuscript. May mga ilalagay na pong mga forms in front of your research studies. And then, pag nailagay na po ng inyong department focal person and research instructors yung mga documents that are needed for your research manuscript, you, as the researchers, will now be distributing your research manuscript to the different panel members. But again, you have to give 5 days of leeway for your research manuscripts to be read by your research panel members. So magbigay po tayo ng 5 days allotment before our scheduled proposal na distribute na po dapat kayo. So that is the scheduling process of our research proposal. Kung naaalala nyo po yung sinabi ko kanina that your instructors and your research department focal persons will be including a document in front of your research manuscript, ito po yun yung sinasabi ko kanina. This is what we call the research proposal evaluation tool. So what basically happens here is that your research panel members will be looking at your paper based on the following criteria. So may mga questions tayo dyan. For example, does the situation analysis portray the problem in the global, national, regional, local context? So ilalagay po ng inyong mga research panel members yung kanilang mga remarks or suggestions in that section beside those questions. So basically, you will be guided accordingly by your research panel members because of this research proposal evaluation tool. Gone are the days wherein birok-birukan yung tupay laing dagiti suggestions dagiti yanti panel yo on your manuscript. Hindi na po yun if we will be using the research proposal evaluation checklist. So that will be included in your paper. Right? So this is a continuation of the research proposal evaluation checklist. So as you can see, meron po tayo ditong mga 21 items that you have to complete para po makapasa kayo sa ating mga research proposal. So as I said a while ago, diba, sinabi ko list of references ang last part ng ating research manuscript. So number 21, list of references conform to the set guidelines. In-text citations are reflected in the reference list, vice versa. So those are the criteria that the research panel members will be using in checking or evaluating your research proposals. Also, we will be using this format as the front page of your research manuscript. So this is the sample title page for your thesis proposal. So at the top will be the title of the study, and then at the middle will be a thesis proposal presented to the faculty of Ilocos Sur Community College Health Science Department. So you have to specify kung ano yung department ninyo, and then you write there in partial fulfillment for requirements for the degree what your course is, and then yung mga names of the people involved. So that is your title page. We also have here the sample acceptance sheet for thesis proposal. Once po na pinirmahan na ng mga panel members na ito, yung form na ito, that means that your paper is already ready to be conducted. Meaning nakapasa na po kayo sa mga research proposal na ginawa ninyo. So this is the sample acceptance sheet signifying that your thesis proposal has been accepted and should be conducted the soonest possible time. This is also a sample of the letter of intent that I was telling you a while ago. Again, you can just ask your research instructor or your department research focal person for the template. So dito po is that you will only be supplying the title of your paper, the aims and objectives of your research study, and then the people who will be involved in your research proposal. So nandito po yung chairman, panel 1, panel 2, critic, statistician, advisor, and secretary, and you have to specify the date that was selected for your research proposal. So, ito po yung ating sample na template for your research proposal letter of intent. And then, para po maganda yung ating grading system, we also came up with a general criterion for research output presentations wherein your studies or your proposals will be checked based on a 70-30 basis. So it means that your manuscript will be adjudged 70% while your oral presentation will only comprise of 30%. Again, the templates for this can be supplied by your department focal persons and research instructors. And that ends my presentation regarding the Imrad format and the general overview of how research proposals are done in Ilocos Sur Community College. I hope that you learned something from me, and I hope that I was able to give you snippets of information and tips on how you can properly write your research proposals and hopefully complete it the soonest possible time. Before I end my presentation, I would just like to give you some points to ponder on. Change is always painful, but it is our only hope for survival. With that being said, maraming salamat po for taking time to attend in our webinar, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of the sessions.